Come along with me today as we make a cheesy chicken pot pie covered in sourdough biscuits. Thank you for joining us here today at Plain Living Homestead, where we share our homesteading, church planting, and simple living here on the plains of South Dakota. Early this morning, I started by getting some broth ready and cooking my chicken. So I'm going to rough chop up some vegetables and take my frozen chicken. I'm going to throw it all in the Instant Pot, and I'm going to cook it under pressure for about 35 minutes, and then I'm going to let it just cool down throughout the day. And then I'm also going to go ahead and make my biscuit dough so it can ferment throughout the day, and then it will be ready for supper time. Today, I want to tell you a little bit about how I've learned to do a lot of the things that I've learned how to do over the years. I want to start at the beginning though. So when Scott and I first got married, I did not know how to do anything except ride a horse and shoot a gun. And maybe that's a story for another vlog or another video. But after our first couple years of marriage, Scott was a police officer, I had 2 little girls, and we were living in a small apartment. And I started to read my Bible more, and the Lord revealed to me that the biblical woman and the virtuous woman, she was so highly praised because she had so many skills. She was so productive. She was able to run her household and be efficient and be a blessing to her husband, and in doing so was able to glorify the Lord. So I really set out to learn as many skills as I possibly could. In particular, I wanted to look at traditional skills that, 100 years ago, every woman knew how to do. Maybe not even 100 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So the first couple things that I learned were how to cook from scratch, which I knew how to cook a little bit, but very limited. I needed recipes, or I relied on recipes that I had grown up cooking, and I didn't really know how to just throw something together, or what herbs went with what, or what was nutritious, or how to make a balanced meal. I didn't know any of that. And then the next thing that I took up was sewing, and the beginning of my sewing journey was interesting, to say the least. Now, I want to read you some of the notes that I have in my Bible about some of the skills that the Proverbs 31 woman has. I'm going to skip over things that are character qualities for now. I'm going to come back to that later. But some of the skills that she has are that she is resourceful and thrifty. She's into real estate and or agriculture. She creates items and sells them for a profit. She's a seamstress. She's well dressed because she is such an honorable seamstress. She's not only a seamstress, but also a salesperson. She takes her goods and sells them in the markets. She is a housekeeper, and she trains her children. After I got my broth going, the next thing I did was to prepare my sourdough biscuits. And this is actually just my regular biscuit recipe, plus a cup of starter. And the starter doesn't even have to be active. So I just make this up like regular biscuits, stir in my starter, cover it with a wet cloth, and leave it on the counter for the day. Now, I'm kind of to the point in biscuit making that I don't really use a recipe, I just kind of eyeball it because we need a bigger than normal batch, and over the years I have kind of tweaked mine to know exactly how I want the texture. So basically, you want to do 2 cups of flour, half a teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, mix that together well, and then 6 tablespoons of cold butter cut in, 3/4 to 1 cup of milk, and then you knead that, roll it, and cut it into biscuits. Okay, back to my early years of marriage when I was studying the Proverbs 31 woman and all of her skills. I was just blown away at all of the skills she was expected to have. And I also started reading more about pioneer women and homesteading and how those women in early America were able to survive because, man, they could just do everything. Now, I took all of this very seriously and decided that I wanted to start learning how to sew. And remember, this is way before the times of YouTube tutorials. And I did not pick up a book. I did not ask someone for help. I just took some materials that I had, bought a cheap pack of hand sewing needles and a cheap roll of thread, and I just got to work making a memory quilt out of my girls' baby clothes. And I think Mom still has that today. It's laughable, the fact that I didn't do any research or any kind of learning. I just sat down and did it. That's how I learned to do a lot of things in the first few years of our marriage, and unfortunately, that usually means you learn the hard way. But not too long after that, my grandmother came to visit, and she was a master seamstress. I'm talking 60 years worth of just being very, very skilled at sewing and doing it for a living. So she bought me my first sewing machine and pattern, and she sat down with me and she taught me how to make a skirt for my girls. And ever since then, the rest is history. Once I realized that I could make clothes, there was nothing stopping me, and I have been learning ever since. Once my broth had finished cooking under pressure, fully naturally released all the pressure, and then cooled off on the counter, I took all of the chicken out and set that aside. I'm going to pull that off of the bones to go in the chicken pot pie. And then I strained off all of the broth that I had made into this half-gallon jar, and I stuck that in the fridge so that I could use it later in the evening. I even attempted to write a blog way back in the day before blogging was a thing. It was called No, I'm Not Kim Possible, and it's so funny to look back at that. I've tried to find some of it on the internet and it's just long gone. I even tried to become an influencer. This was back in the very beginning of when companies would send you products and you would post it on Pinterest and MySpace and Facebook, and you would write a review, and I did not do well at that because that's just not my thing. But I started to just try all kinds of new things. I started learning recipes from some of my neighbors and friends, and we ended up moving back closer to our family, so I started working at my parents' shop, and I learned how to do marketing, how to run an e-commerce website, how to ship packages, all sorts of things. All of this not to brag or say, look at all the things I know how to do, but to encourage you that even with 2 young kids and not a lot of money, I was able to learn how to do a lot of things. And that was even, like I said, before the days of YouTube tutorials. I didn't do a whole lot of research. I just decided I wanted to do something and figured it out. Some things you have to look up. If you want to make soap, find a recipe. If you want to learn about herbs, go and read about all the different herbs and what goes together and which flavors go with different types of meat. But generally speaking, you can learn anything that you want to learn. Next, for my chicken pot pie, I'm going to actually start making the chicken pot pie now and putting everything together. So I'm going to roughly chop an onion, and then I'm going to roughly chop a bunch of celery, and then I'm going to chop some carrots into pretty small pieces. I don't like my carrots to be crunchy, so I typically cut them a little bit smaller than what I see in other people's chicken pot pies. But I'm just going to chop all this up, and then meanwhile I've got a cast iron skillet on the stove on about medium heat. It's been warming up for a little bit, and I'm going to throw a good bit of butter in there, and then I'm going to saute all of these with some herbs and spices until everything is soft. The onions are translucent. The carrots are not quite going to be all the way soft. They do take a little bit more time than the rest, but we're just going to get us a nice base going for our chicken pot pie. And look how pretty the colors are of these fresh carrots from a local farm. Actually, all of these vegetables are from a local farm. We get them delivered once a week. Their van takes raw milk up to Sioux Falls, which is the big city that we live near. And on their way, they go right by our farm, so they drop us off kind of like a CSA box once a week. So I've got this butter melting. I'm going to saute all these vegetables, and I do this a little bit different every time. I just open up the spice cabinet and kind of whatever sounds good, that's what I throw in. So this time I did quite a bit of sage, which I used to not use sage. I was kind of afraid of it. I would hear people like at Thanksgiving when you make your dressing for your turkey, and they would say, oh, there's too much sage in this. Or I would hear people talking about venison and say, oh, if a deer gets into sage, it's disgusting. You don't want that meat. So I always kind of hesitated to use sage. But here recently, probably the last year or so, I have fallen in love with it. I just love the flavor that it brings. So I put quite a bit of sage, some marjoram, fresh cracked pepper, a good bit of salt. I really don't even remember what else I put in there. Probably a little bit of oregano and thyme. Honestly, once you know how herbs taste and what you're looking for, it's pretty easy just to throw all this together and mix it up. Meanwhile, Lily helped me. She grated about 12 ounces of Havarti cheese. Normally, I would use something a little bit more sharp or tangy or stinky. The last time we did this, we did a mixture of sharp cheddar, Gouda, and pepper jack, and oh my word, that was so good. But we were at the end of our grocery month, so Havarti was our last block of cheese in the fridge, so we just made do with what we had. So when all of the vegetables get pretty soft and the onions are translucent, I'm going to add in some flour, and actually normally I would use some of my sourdough discard, but I didn't have enough for this. So that's a really good way to kind of maintain that sourdough element, but since I didn't have enough, I just added a little bit of flour. And I'm going to stir that in until it soaks up all the butter and you don't see any of the white flour anymore. And then I usually let that cook for about 5 minutes just to get all the flour taste out of it. If you've ever made any sort of gravy or thickened a soup with flour and you didn't cook it enough, then you probably know what I'm talking about. Then I'm going to add in some milk, and that's going to thicken all that up into a gravy. And that's going to make this creamy cheese sauce in our chicken pot pie. And I'm just going to let this simmer and keep stirring and let the sauce thicken up. And then I'm going to add in some of that chicken broth that I made earlier this morning. And that's going to really just add a lot of nutrients into this without having to force my kids to just drink chicken broth. And then I'm going to let this simmer and bubble. And then eventually I'll stir in the cheese. Now, when this sauce thickens, I'm going to pour in, I have some frozen diced potatoes. If you use fresh potatoes, you want to chop them pretty small and add those in at the beginning when you put the carrots in, because they'll take a while to cook. But I'm going to add those in here. They cook really fast because they are so small. And then I'm going to let this just simmer and cook those potatoes and carrots while I get my biscuits cut out to put on top. Now, sourdough biscuits are a little bit wetter and messier than regular biscuits, so I'm going to dump these out on a floured counter, and I could not find my rolling pin today, so forgive me for looking a little bit goofy. I'm just going to kind of press these out with my hands, and I'm going to press them out and then fold it over, and then press it out and fold it over, and I just want to create layers because for this particular recipe, layered biscuits make it so delicious. And you'll see that I'm gingerly using the tips of my fingers to press the dough out. That's because there are still pretty large chunks of butter in this dough, and I want those to stay. That's part of what helps it be so flaky and have those layers in it. And if you use the palm of your hand to really smash this out, you'll start to melt the butter. So if I look goofy, it's for a reason. I'm being careful not to heat the dough up too much. So I'm going to fold quite a few layers into this, and then I'm going to cut it out with my stainless steel funnel because I also could not find my biscuit cutter. While I finish making these biscuits, I just want to chat as if I were talking to my sister. Something that I hope to do with this channel is to share encouragement and tips and tricks and to teach other women how to do some of these skills in a practical way and to provide a way to learn that has a good spirit about it, that wants to glorify God, that uses good, clean music, that is not about all the things that I can do, but about learning to do things for the Lord. And that's kind of where I want to come back to those character qualities of the Proverbs 31 woman. In those early years, I really honed in on those skills. I noticed all the things that she could do. But what I missed out on was all of those verses in between that filled in the blanks of what her character was. And I want to read some of those to you real quick out of those notes in my Bible. So, she was trustworthy and chaste. She was diligent. She was an early riser. She had strength and worked on her fitness. She was a volunteer and a philanthropist that took care of the poor. She was well prepared and not afraid of the future. She was honorable. She carried herself with dignity. And she was not chatty or flirty or a gossip. She was set apart, and people knew that. And she feared the Lord. And one of the biggest things here that I realized is that the fear of the Lord is more valuable than any of our beauty, any of the vain things that we might work on about ourselves. And then that the law of kindness, it should be in our tongues, and it is the opposite of contention. I studied through this to find what is the law of kindness, and it's to always want good for others, to do good to others, to hope for good for others, not to be envious when others are doing things or achieving things or getting things. And that's something that I hope this channel can be as well, is a way to create community. It doesn't have to be competition. In fact, nothing needs to be competition. That just creates strife and contention. And we want to work together. We want to work together to build our homes. We want to work together to serve the Lord. We want to work together to build our families. So that is my goal here, is to show you what I'm doing and take you by the hand and let you come alongside me and do these things as well. Meanwhile, back at the chicken pot pie. Sorry, I think my jokes are hilarious. So I've got all this stirred up well. I'm gonna melt all the cheese into the sauce. Honestly, the peas and corn would be really good even if they're just completely cold and not cooked. So I'm just gonna dump these in sort of as the last thing and stir them in, and the hot sauce is gonna warm them up enough to be good. I'm gonna take the last little bit of my shredded cheese and sprinkle that over the top. And then I'm going to arrange my sourdough biscuits to cover the top. Now, the first time we made this, a couple weeks ago with our friends, I made larger biscuits, and I left a good bit of space in between the biscuits. And it was really pretty that way, but then it ended up, there weren't enough biscuits. All of us wanted more biscuit with our chicken pot pie filling. So this time I did smaller biscuits, but I did quite a few more of them and covered the whole top. So once I got those biscuits on here, I just stuck it in the oven at 425, and I don't have any idea how long I baked that, but I left it until the biscuits rose and the tops of them were nice and brown and crispy. And when I took them out, I brushed them with some melted butter.
I cut the potatoes into 4 pieces and then put them into the pot of water so they can boil. When you cut them into 4 pieces, it's easier for them to boil because they're not just one big glob. And they are golden potatoes, and you don't have to peel these kind. I don't know why, but you don't. And the other kind we used are brown rusted potatoes, and we peeled those ones because they were really, really dirty and gross, and we didn't want to eat dirt. That would be gross. And one of our potatoes was shaped like a heart, and it was adorable. And we had to cut it open. It was so sad. But there was 8 potatoes, and they were all delicious. And there was a lot of cutting to do. I melted a pot of butter and poured it into the mashed potatoes. And then the bowl for our mixer it had cookie dough in it. So we hand smashed them, and we put a piece of butter in the bottom of the bowl, and we melted some butter and put it in. Then we put some half and half in to make it creamy. We didn't have any milk, so we just used half and half. And then we smashed it all up and mixed it, and soon they were beautiful and creamy and delicious and buttery. That's how they turned out at the end when we were done, and it was delicious. We put some salt and pepper and a little bit of garlic in, and a whole lot of butter, and we just love butter, so it was delicious. I kept having to add more salt because I wasn't putting enough. With our potatoes, we had chicken pot pie, and we put biscuits on top of it and cooked it with it, and it was just super extra good. We put them in these cute little bowls, and they were delicious. And I loved how the biscuit was on top, so you could get biscuit and chicken pot pie with all the vegetables and delicious creamy potatoes. And we have these cute plates to put them on. Thank you for watching. Please like our video and subscribe for our channel.
Thank you for joining us today here at Plain Living Homestead, where we share our adventures of homesteading, church planning, and simple living here on the plains of South Dakota.